Welcome to a very special extra-long edition of The Deep Dive.
Great to be diving in.
As you know, we take the fascinating and often wonderfully weird source materials you send our way and really plunge into the most captivating details.
And today's collection is, well, it's something else.
It really is. Prepare yourselves for an extensive exploration. One of our listeners has gifted us with a truly astonishing collection of book excerpts.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Each one is like a window into some incredibly unusual and strange falls from the sky, bizarre discoveries, objects appearing where they, absolutely shouldn't.
Right.
So we're embarking on a deep dive that will be more of a marathon than a sprint because, trust me, every single one of these stories deserves our attention.
Absolutely. We need to cover them all.
Our mission to meticulously unearth the most curious and thought-provoking aspects of these often overlooked anecdotes and really dig into the details that might just maybe challenge how we see the world.
What immediately strikes me about this compilation is just its sheer breadth. We have reports spanning over a century, originating from all corners of the globe, detailing phenomena that stubbornly resist easy categorization.
Yeah.
It forces us to consider the potential limitations of the scientific understanding of those times and maybe even our own.
All right, let's jump into our first category. And this one feels like a recurring mystery throughout history of falls of gelatinous substances.
Oh, yes, the jelly falls.
We have multiple accounts, notably clustered around the time of the great meteor showers of November 1833. So picture this. In Rahway, New Jersey, people found lumps of a whitish jelly on the ground.
Described as being like coagulated egg white, I believe.
Exactly. Then, in Nelson County, Virginia, a Mr. H. Garland reported a jelly-like substance about the size of a quarter.
Okay.
And get this, a witness at Westport, New York, saw a teacup-sized mass that looked exactly like boiled starch.
Like boiled starch. Interesting comparison.
Finally, in Newark, New Jersey, someone encountered a gelatinous material akin to soft soap, apparently not very elastic, and it just evaporated.
Huh. Evaporated easily. That's odd. What's truly interesting here is the similarity in descriptions across these geographically disparate locations, isn't it?
It really is.
While the details aren't identical, the core image of a translucent jelly-like substance is pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And the temporal link to the 1833 meteor showers is also a significant point. Could there have been some atmospheric process triggered by this meteoric activity that resulted in these falls?
It's hard to say, right?
It certainly pushes us beyond simple explanations of, like, terrestrial origins.
And the strangeness doesn't end with 1833. Our sources include reports from the British Association in 1874 and 1875 documenting further instances of these gelatinous falls.
Right, so it wasn't just a one-off cluster.
Which leads to a rather out-there idea presented in the books, the possibility of a partially gelatinous sky.
A gelatinous sky.
Yeah. The thought is that perhaps meteors were actually tearing through this cosmic jelly, and the resulting debris was what fell to Earth.
Wow, that is a wild thought, considering our understanding of the atmosphere, isn't it? Indeed. The concept of a gelatinous sky is certainly a radical departure from the established atmospheric models of the 19th century, which focused on gases and particles.
Totally.
However, the repeated independent observations of these falls do suggest that something unusual was occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Miss V even presented samples of these gelatinous fragments to the French Academy in 1836 indicates that these were not simply dismissed as folklore, but were considered worthy of scientific attention, at least by some.
That's a good point.
This highlights the ongoing tension between observed phenomena and established scientific paradigms, doesn't it?
Right. Okay, moving from the mysterious jellies, we encounter something that sounds almost unbelievable. Falls of earthly matter.
Actual dirt.
From the sky.
Apparently. Picture yourself strolling down a well-used path after a thunderstorm and discovering lumps of, well, dirt just sitting there. That's what reportedly happened in Reading on July 3rd, 1883. 3 distinct lumps, no less. 3 lumps on a well-used path. That type of report really challenges our fundamental understanding of gravity and how terrestrial materials are typically transported.
Absolutely.
The prevailing scientific philosophy of the time, what was known as the positivist spirit, emphasizing empirical observation and established scientific laws, naturally viewed such claims with considerable skepticism.
You'd think so.
For earthly matter to simply appear in the sky and then fall seems to defy those basic principles.
Yet the source materials we have insist that there are numerous accounts of such events. They even touch upon a rather mind-bending notion. The atmospheric manufacturing of such substances.
Atmospheric manufacturing.
Yeah. Can you even begin to imagine the atmosphere somehow assembling solid lumps of Earth?
The idea of the atmosphere acting as a kind of natural workshop, spontaneously creating solid matter, is certainly outside the bounds of conventional science as we understand it.
Way outside.
It really underscores the degree to which these unusual reports challenge the prevailing scientific worldview. How do you reconcile seemingly impossible events with first-hand accounts?
It's tough.
It suggests that perhaps there were atmospheric processes at play that were not fully understood at the time?
Now, for a complete change of pace, and frankly, a rather unsettling story,
Okay.
in July 1836, near Edinburgh at Arthur's Seat, a group of boys were exploring the rocky landscape, hoping to find birds' nests.
Right. Typical boys' adventure.
What they discovered instead were thin sheets of slate that seemed to lead to a small hidden cave. Inside, 17 tiny coffins.
17. Tiny coffins.
Each only a few inches long, containing miniature wooden figures dressed in incredibly detailed and different styles and materials.
Wow. That is incredibly specific and creepy.
Very.
This is a truly perplexing find.
Yeah.
The level of detail in the costuming of the miniature figures within their tiny coffins strongly suggests a deliberate and possibly ritualistic act. This specific arrangement, 2 tiers of 8 coffins, with the third row just beginning with a single coffin, further emphasizes a sense of intentionality and design.
Exactly. And the obvious question that leaps to mind, how on earth did these get there?
Yeah.
Our source emphasizes the enduring mystery surrounding their deposition. Was this some forgotten local custom, a very elaborate and rather macabre children's game?
Or something else entirely.
Or could it point to something much stranger that we can no longer even guess at?
The fact that these were placed within a concealed cave suggests a desire for secrecy, further hinting that this was more than just a casual act.
Good point.
The meticulous craftsmanship of the coffins and the varied attire of the figures certainly capture the imagination and suggest narratives that have long since vanished from living memory. It raises questions about the beliefs and practices of the people who placed them there.
Definitely one to ponder. Okay, let's shift our focus now to falls of a completely different nature. Sulfurous substances.
Sulfur.
On January 30th, 1868, in Pusk, Poland, a mass of burning sulfur, reportedly about the size of a human fist, fell onto a road. Burning. A group of villagers had to physically stamp it out to extinguish it. This event is actually documented in the British Association reports from 1874 to 1875.
The detail of the burning sulfur and the villagers' immediate reaction really brings this account to life. Sulfur, of course, has a long history of association with volcanic activity and, in folklore, with more, well, infernal explanations.
Right.
The fact that it was burning upon falling adds another layer of intrigue.
And our source doesn't shy away from making a direct connection here. It notes the characteristic sulfurous odors often associated with meteorites and links this to age-old stories of demons and other malevolent entities often described as having a sulfurous presence. It even ventures to suggest a possible and rather provocative link to undesirable visitors from other worlds. Okay, so leaning into the more speculative side. This interpretation, while certainly speculative, underscores how unusual and unexplained phenomena can become intertwined with existing cultural beliefs and narratives.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The sulfurous aspect in this context becomes a potential signifier of the unknown, of something alien or perhaps even malevolent. It's a fascinating example of how people attempt to make sense of the extraordinary through the lens of their existing worldview.
Sticking with the theme of things falling from the sky, let's delve into the relationship between meteorites and storms.
Okay. Meteorites and storms.
We have a report of a meteorite actually falling within a whirlwind in Sweden on September 24th, 1883, an event noted in Nature, no less.
In a whirlwind. That's specific.
And going back a bit further, to December 17th, 1852, a storm was accompanied by the sighting of a triangular cloud with a distinct red nucleus and a long tail.
A triangular cloud. Red nucleus. That sounds dramatic.
Doesn't it? The simultaneous occurrence of such unusual atmospheric phenomena, like a triangular cloud with striking coloration, alongside the documented fall of a meteorite, certainly prompts questions about potential connections between these events.
Right.
Even though conventional scientific understanding at the time was often hesitant to acknowledge such links, it raises the possibility that certain atmospheric conditions might play a role in the behavior or visibility of meteorites.
Precisely. Our source even points out the prevailing scientific skepticism of the time regarding any link between meteorites and storms. Apparently, some attributed any perceived correlation to the ignorance of the peasantry.
Oh, charming.
However, it then presents a report from Dr. Boost in the 1852 British Association records, who, without any mention of the, shall we say, more unconventional theories we might encounter later, reported observing 3 distinct aerial lights falling during thunderstorms in India.
Ah, so an actual scientific report.
Yeah.
Dr. Bust's observations, coming from a recognized scientific authority of the time, directly challenged the outright dismissal of any connection between unusual aerial phenomena and storms.
Seems like it.
It suggests that there might indeed be atmospheric conditions during storms that are either conducive to or perhaps even directly involved in the descent or appearance of unusual objects from the sky.
Now brace yourselves for a real mishmash. Rains of truly unusual substances.
Okay, unusual substances. Let's hear it.
We'll start with a documented fall of a yellow substance, and we're talking significant quantities, by the bucketful in Pictou Harbor, Nova Scotia.
By the bucketful. Yellow!
Yeah. Recorded in the American Journal of Science, a subsequent analysis revealed the presence of nitrogen, ammonia, and even an animal odor.
Nitrogen, ammonia, and an animal odor. That's a strange mix.
Isn't it? However, in a classic move, the editor of the journal, perhaps seeking a more conventional explanation, identified pollen within the sample.
Ah, pollen. The go-to explanation sometimes. The combination of nitrogen, ammonia, and an animal odor in a substance falling from the sky is certainly quite peculiar and doesn't immediately lend itself to simple explanations.
Right.
While the editor's finding of pollen offers a more terrestrial source, it doesn't necessarily account for all the other reported components and the sheer volume of the fall. It highlights the challenges of interpreting such events based on limited analytical capabilities back then.
Then we have the intriguing case of the black rains of the Clyde Valley in Scotland.
Black rain. Sounds ominous.
Not just a single isolated incident, but multiple occurrences in March 1884 and again in March 1828, all meticulously documented by Knowledge magazine.
Multiple times, okay.
And Marlsford, England also experienced black rain on September 4th, 1873, and remarkably, again the very next day.
2 days in a row. The repeated instances of black rain in specific geographical areas suggest a localized phenomenon, although the precise source of the blackening agent remains an open question. Could this have been related to industrial pollution carried by unusual wind patterns? Or perhaps something else entirely? The fact that it occurred on consecutive days in Marlsford is particularly noteworthy.
But the black lanes of Slains, also in Scotland, really stand out in their frequency.
Lanes. Okay.
We're talking about numerous documented events between 1862 and 1863, specifically in January, twice in May, and again in October.
That's a lot of black rain in one place.
And here's where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. Following some of these black rain showers, vast quantities of pumice stone, or what was described as slag, washed ashore near Slains.
Slag, washing ashore after black rain.
Yeah, a chemist who examined the material even concluded that it was indeed smelting slag.
This is where the narrative becomes exceptionally strange. The source material suggests that the sheer volume of this slag-like substance was potentially greater than the entire known output of all the smelting works across the globe at that time.
Exactly, that's the astonishing claim.
If this is accurate, it becomes incredibly difficult to reconcile with conventional terrestrial industrial processes. It forces us to consider possibilities that lie far outside our usual understanding of material origins.
Right. Our source explicitly raises the question, could we have witnessed an artificial product in truly enormous quantities falling directly from the sky?
Falling slag in those amounts.
It even mentions the significant difficulty the author of a publication called Scottish Showers encountered in getting this extraordinary phenomenon seriously considered by the scientific community.
I can imagine.
Interestingly, some of these black rains coincided with eruptions of Mount Vesuvius and Mount Etna, offering a potential, though perhaps incomplete, explanation for those specific instances.
Okay. Volcanic ash could explain some.
While others occurred without any known volcanic activity nearby.
Right. The instances where the black rains align with volcanic eruptions do provide a plausible, though perhaps not fully comprehensive, explanation for those specific events, suggesting the transport of volcanic ash.
Makes
However, the cases where no such volcanic activity was recorded nearby are far more puzzling, particularly when coupled with the staggering amounts of the accompanying slag-like material.
Yeah.
This discrepancy really highlights the complexity of these events and the limitations of purely terrestrial explanations.
And then we have the perplexing phenomenon of red rains.
Red rain. Okay, heard of this one.
Now, the standard scientifically accepted explanation, of course, involves colored sands being transported long distances from the Sahara Desert by strong winds.
The Sahara dust theory.
Yes. And our source duly acknowledges this, even noting what it calls the impositivist acceptance of various terrestrial sources for the coloration. But then it introduces a truly unconventional idea. The possibility that the red rain's color might originate from other worlds.
Interplanetary dust, perhaps. The notion of interplanetary dust contributing to rainfall is certainly a far more exotic hypothesis. While the transport of Saharan dust is a well-documented phenomenon, the source material hints at instances where the scale, composition, or other associated phenomena of the red rain events might not neatly align with that established model. It prompts us to consider the possibility of extraterrestrial influences, however unlikely they might seem from a conventional scientific perspective.
We hear about haze, seemingly connected to these events, reaching as far as the Philippines and Hong Kong during the Australian mud rain of 1902.
Wow, that's a huge distance.
And a significant European fall of matter in 1903. Mr. Clayton analyzed the English fall and attributed it to windborne dust originating from Wessex, but the geographical extent of the fall was remarkable, reportedly covering even the distant Canary Islands.
Wessex dust reaching the Canaries, that's a stretch.
This leads to a rather startling and imaginative suggestion: the possibility of our planet passing through the remnants of a powdered world in space.
A powdered world. That's quite an image. The sheer geographical scale of these events, spanning entire continents and reaching far-flung island chains, certainly stretches the limits of typical windborne dust explanations.
It does.
The evocative image of Earth traversing the debris of a powdered world underscores the human desire to find explanations for extraordinary events, even if those explanations venture into the realm of the speculative. It highlights the challenge of explaining widespread phenomena with purely localized causes.
Even in cases where analysis, such as one published in Nature, identified a red substance as indeed being Sahara sand, noting the presence of water and organic matter, our source points out a crucial fact. Dust storms are, well, a relatively common occurrence in the Sahara Desert.
Right, they happen all the time.
This begs the question: can every instance of red rain be quite so readily and definitively attributed to this single, well-established source?
Good question. The persistent reliance on a single familiar explanation, even when the scale or the accompanying circumstances of the event seem unusual, is a pattern we observe repeatedly throughout these historical accounts.
Yeah, seems that way.
It reflects the human tendency to seek out and favor established frameworks, even when the available data might suggest the possibility of something more extraordinary or less understood. It also highlights the inherent conservatism within scientific interpretation sometimes.
Okay, now let's plunge into the rather bizarre category of falls of organic matter.
Organic matter falling.
Okay, beginning with something that sounds rather unsettling, a substance referred to as flesh-colored nostoc that reportedly fell in Kentucky.
Flesh-colored nostoc. What is nostoc again?
It's a type of bacteria, forms jelly-like stuff sometimes. Initially identified as such by a Mr. Brandis, a Professor Lawrence Smith later confidently declared it to be dried reptile spawn, most likely from frogs.
Okay, so first bacteria, then frog spawn. The initial identification as nostoc, a type of cyanobacteria known for forming gelatinous masses, is interesting given our earlier discussion of gelatinous falls.
True.
Professor Smith's subsequent reinterpretation as reptile spawn aligns more readily with conventional explanations involving the transport of terrestrial biological material, perhaps by strong winds or whirlwinds.
But the story takes a decidedly strange turn. A Dr. A.M. Edwards conducted his own investigation and concluded that the substance was actually lung tissue.
Lung tissue.
Lung tissue, with other specimens identified as cartilage or muscular fibers.
What? That's completely different.
I know. Meanwhile, adding to the confusion, a Professor Fessig listed it as fish spawn, and the Monthly Weather Review rather vaguely suggested it might be dried fish or batrachian, frog and toad spawn. What an incredibly mixed and contradictory bag of identifications.
That's just wild. This series of wildly conflicting identifications really underscores the significant challenges in accurately analyzing these unusual fallen substances, particularly with the analytical tools and biological knowledge available at the time.
Yeah, clearly.
The fact that multiple experts could examine the same material and arrive at such drastically different conclusions highlights the inherent ambiguity of the substance itself and the limitations of early scientific investigation.
And this rather peculiar tale brings us back, somewhat full circle, to the subject of gelatinous substances.
Right, back to the jelly.
Our source reiterates the sheer number of reports of these falls and once again entertains the rather unconventional idea, quite literally floating it, that perhaps the sky itself might, in part, be composed of some kind of gelatinous material.
The recurring nature of these reports of gelatinous falls, coupled with the persistent difficulties in definitively identifying their composition and origin, continues to be a significant and unresolved mystery throughout these historical accounts. The idea of a gelatinous sky, while highly speculative, serves to emphasize just how poorly understood these phenomena were.
Next up, we have a report of something potentially edible, a substance referred to as manna that fell in Persia in 1829.
Manna, like the biblical stuff.
Well, that's what they called it. The local population had apparently never encountered it before, but remarkably, their sheep readily consumed it, and they even went so far as to grind it into a type of flour and bake it into a passable, though reportedly rather bland, bread.
Sheep ate it, and they made bread.
Okay. Science, in this instance, offered a swift and seemingly definitive explanation. It was a type of lichen originating from Asia Minor, transported over vast distances by powerful whirlwinds.
Ah, the whirlwind explanation again. The whirlwind explanation provides a convenient way for science to assimilate this unusual event into a pre-existing framework, the natural transport of terrestrial biological material through atmospheric forces.
Seems convenient.
However, the claim that the local inhabitants were unfamiliar with it, while scientists readily identified a specific lichen from a distant region, seems somewhat improbable, doesn't it? You'd expect locals to know edible stuff around them.
Our source certainly shares this skepticism, pointing out that if there were indeed something nutritious being carried by whirlwinds, the local population would likely be quite familiar with it.
Exactly.
It goes on to mention other reported falls of edible substances in Persia and Asiatic Turkey, all somewhat dogmatically labeled as manna, despite exhibiting variations in their descriptions, some resembling seeds, others being gelatinous, and still others appearing as lumps similar to filberts that could be ground into flavorless bread.
So different things all just called manna. The somewhat rigid application of a single explanation, manna, originating from Asia Minor, to all these diverse reports of edible falls, regardless of their differing characteristics, does suggest a certain reluctance to consider alternative possibilities or to acknowledge potential inconsistencies in the explanation.
Seems like it. And then we encounter a truly intriguing and somewhat whimsical thought.
Oh.
The idea of deep-sea fish occasionally finding bags of grain and sugar.
Bags of grain and sugar in the deep sea.
Yeah. Our source playfully wonders if this might suggest some kind of overhead traffic of commodities, perhaps implying materials falling from above rather than originating from the ocean floor.
Overhead traffic dropping grain and sugar into the sea. This is a wonderfully lateral and imaginative line of thought.
Isn't it fun?
The discovery of terrestrial goods in the deep ocean, far from known shipping routes or shipwreck sites, certainly raises intriguing questions about their potential origins and modes of transport. It encourages us to think beyond conventional explanations and consider more unusual possibilities.
Let's now turn our attention to falls of fibrous materials, substances that bore a resemblance to cloth or paper.
Fiber stuff, okay.
In Karoli, Silesia, in 1839, an astonishing 200-square-foot sheet of a material described as being exactly like cotton felt reportedly fell.
200 square feet.
Yeah.
Like a giant piece of felt.
Enough to potentially make clothing. Microscopic examination of this strange substance apparently revealed KVJ.
KVJ? What on earth is KVJ?
No idea. Our source just mentions it.
The sheer scale of the fallen material, a 200-square-foot sheet, is truly remarkable and argues against a simple explanation of wind-blown debris. The identification as KVJ unfortunately doesn't offer much clarity for a modern audience.
Not at all.
It's possible this is an archaic or regional term, or perhaps it refers to a substance that was never definitively identified. The potential for using it as clothing material further highlights its unusual properties.
In Shanghai in 1846, an olive gray powder fell, which upon examination was found to be an aggregation of both black and white hairs,
Hairs falling as powder.
apparently. Interestingly, these hairs emitted an odor similar to burnt hair when ignited. Initially, they were thought to be mineral fibers,
Okay, mineral fibers make some sense.
but later examinations using more powerful microscopes suggested that they were not hairs at all, but rather kifi.
Keefe, there's that word again. The conflicting results of the microscopic analyses really underscore the difficulties in identifying unknown materials with the scientific tools available in the mid-19th century. The organic nature suggested by the burnt hair smell clearly contradicts the initial assumption of mineral origin. The recurrence of this unidentified Keefe is certainly a puzzling detail that hints at potentially unknown biological or atmospheric phenomena.
Next, we have reports of silky substances falling from the sky.
Silky stuff. Okay, this sounds more familiar, maybe.
In Peru in 1821, a shower of something closely resembling silk occurred in such vast quantities that it was likened to an entire lost cargo.
A lost cargo of silk falling from the sky.
That's the comparison. Samples of this material sent to France were noted to be similar to wind-carried silky filaments that had been observed near Paris. And even earlier, in 1665, a blue silk-like substance reportedly fell near Norberg.
Blue silk. Okay, the usual explanation for falls of silky substances often involves spiderwebs, right? Specifically, the fine silk threads produced by gossamer spiders.
Yeah, spider silk.
These spiders use these silken filaments to catch the wind and travel, a phenomenon famously observed by Charles Darwin during his voyages.
Exactly. Our source does acknowledge Darwin's observations regarding gossamer spiders, but goes on to suggest that perhaps some of these more substantial silky falls might represent a merging of externally derived substances with these spiderwebs.
A mix. Okay.
It even mentions a particularly heavy and viscous silky substance that fell with such intensity that it actually blinded dogs.
Blinded dogs. That certainly sounds like something far beyond your average spider silk.
Doesn't it just?
The viscous nature and the reported harmful effects on the dogs strongly suggest that this particular fall involved more than just typical spider silk. It raises the possibility of atmospheric contamination or the presence of other, perhaps irritating substances mixed with the spiderweb material.
We also have an account of a thick, woolly substance falling in lumps during a storm in Monin, Chiron in October 1883.
Woolly lumps.
Yeah. This event coincided with rain and violent winds. The editor of a publication describing this noted that the substance was white and had a burned appearance, yet he was unable to identify its origin or composition.
Burn appearance. The description of the substance as burned is quite intriguing and suggests that it may have been subjected to some form of high temperature or chemical reaction prior to falling.
B.
The editor's inability to identify such a seemingly substantial material further emphasizes the unusual nature of these events.
Moving on, in Kuronov, Russia, in March 1832, a combustible, resinous, yellowish substance fell, reportedly covering a significant area.
Combustible and resinous. Okay.
It was noted to have the tenacity of cotton when torn and the consistency of resin when immersed in water, and it emitted a smell reminiscent of prepared oil mixed with wax.
Wow, very specific properties.
Certainly not your typical atmospheric dust.
No. The detailed description of this substance, its combustibility, its unusual physical properties like cotton-like tenacity and resinous consistency, and its distinct odor strongly indicates that it was not a naturally occurring terrestrial material simply transported by the wind.
Right.
It suggests a more complex origin, possibly involving some form of atmospheric chemical process or an external source.
And who could forget the rather unpleasant-sounding falls of butter-like or oily substances?
Butter falling from the sky. Ew.
In Ireland, in the spring of 1695, across multiple counties, including Kilkenny, Limerick, Tipperary, Munster, and Ulster, a soft, clammy, dark yellow substance with a distinctly foul odor fell.
Foul odor, too. Lovely.
Commonly referred to as stinkin' dew. Interestingly, some people at the time even believed it possessed medicinal properties.
Medicinal stinking dew.
Despite this widespread occurrence, there seems to have been a notable lack of any rigorous scientific inquiry into its nature.
That's a shame. The widespread nature of this stinking dew event, occurring across a significant geographical area and over a period of time, strongly suggests a persistent atmospheric phenomenon, possibly localized to that region.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it was described as having a foul odor and a clammy texture certainly makes it sound quite unappealing, despite the claims of medicinal properties. The lack of scientific investigation at the time is a shame, as it represents a missed opportunity to understand a potentially unique event.
We also have a report of a wine yellow, transparent, and soft substance that emitted a smell akin to radical oil, which fell near Carano in 1832. Curiously dubbed sky oil.
Sky oil.
Catchy. Adding to this oily theme, there were other reports of unctuous substances falling near Ardum in the same year, and an oily reddish matter falling in Genoa in February 1841.
These various reports of oily or greasy substances falling from the sky, often accompanied by unusual colors and distinct odors, further contribute to the growing picture of strange materials appearing from the atmosphere that don't readily fit into our standard categories of precipitation or airborne debris.
Right.
They suggest the possibility of unusual atmospheric chemistry, or perhaps even contributions from extraterrestrial sources.
Finally, in this rather extensive category of organic falls, we have the intriguing mention of punk, or amadou.
Amadou?
Yeah, a light chocolate brown substance that was reportedly found associated with meteorite falls, as noted in the British Association reports from 1876 to 1877.
Found with meteorites?
Associated with them, yeah. It's interesting that the English publication seems to consistently refer to it as amadou, which is a type of tinder fungus, rather than punk. This leads to some speculation in our source material about potential discrepancies in terminology between English and French scientific publications of the time.
Huh. The reported association of this amadou, which is indeed a type of tinder fungus, with meteorite falls, is quite peculiar.
Isn't it?
If this association is accurate and not simply a case of misidentification or coincidence, it raises significant questions about how such a terrestrial biological material could be found in proximity to space rocks.
Exactly.
It might suggest unusual atmospheric transport mechanisms, or perhaps even contamination after the meteorite's impact.
Okay, now let's shift our focus entirely to falls of mineral substances, excluding actual meteorites, which we've touched on already.
Minerals, not meteorites. Got it.
We begin with an intriguing report of salt falling high in the mountains of Switzerland during a hailstorm in August 1870.
Salt and hail in the Alps.
Yeah. The rather straightforward orthodox explanation offered at the time, that the salt had been carried over the Mediterranean from some part of Africa.
All the way from Africa to the Swiss Alps in a hailstorm. That's quite a journey for salt.
It seems like it.
The sheer distance involved in the proposed explanation for the Swiss salt fall does seem rather improbable. The idea of salt crystals being lifted from the African continent, traversing the Mediterranean Sea, and then precipitating within a hailstorm in the Swiss Alps requires a truly extraordinary and sustained atmospheric event. It certainly stretches the limits of conventional understanding of particle transport.
We also have a report of a saltish, snow-like substance falling at Scutari in December 1883.
Salt snow.
And the rather mysterious black capillary matter that fell in Charleston, South Carolina in November 1857.
Black capillary matter. What does that even mean?
Good question. Additionally, small friable vesicular masses were reported to have fallen in Lobo in January 1835.
Vesicular. Like full of little bubbles or holes.
Oh, could be. And get this, there's even a report of a substance that tasted distinctly like sugar falling during a storm.
Sugar rain. That's nicer than spink and dew, I suppose.
Marginally.
This diverse collection of mineral falls, ranging from common salt to sugary substances and enigmatic black matter, really highlights the complexity of atmospheric precipitation and the potential for unexpected and unusual constituents. These reports challenge the idea of rain and snow being solely composed of water and suggest that other minerals and materials can sometimes become incorporated into atmospheric processes.
Then we have the somewhat contentious issue of slag or cinders falling from the sky.
Slag again. Didn't we cover this with the black rain?
Sort of, but these are separate reports. A report from Chicago in April 1879 claimed a fall of slag, but a Professor E. Baston rather firmly asserted that the slag was already present on the ground near telegraph wires that had been struck by lightning.
It was already there explanation.
Right. However, conflictingly, the New York Times reported a significant quantity, about 2 bushels, of this substance falling.
2 bushels is a lot to just be lying around unnoticed.
Seems like it. And in 1846, something simply described as only slag was reported to have fallen.
The repeated claims of slag falling from the sky often met with the counter-explanation of it being pre-existing material disturbed by other events like lightning strikes, suggest a point of contention between eyewitness accounts and scientific interpretation.
Definitely.
The significant quantity reported in the New York Times raises questions about the plausibility of it all originating from a localized ground source.
Here's a truly bizarre and almost unbelievable one. In 1855, a large stone was reportedly found far inside the trunk of a living tree in Battersea Fields.
Inside a tree trunk. How?
You really have to wonder how such a thing could possibly occur without severely damaging or killing the tree.
Yeah. The image of a substantial stone embedded deep within the heartwood of a tree is certainly perplexing and seems to defy the normal biological processes of tree growth.
Right.
Did the tree somehow grow around the stone over many years, or was there some other, far more unusual mechanism involved in its placement? It's a true botanical mystery.
And then there's the intriguing case of the stone that burned, which reportedly fell in County Limerick.
A burning stone.
It was described as being unusually heavy, containing sulfur, and actually burned with a crackling noise.
Crackling noise, too.
Wow. A Professor Baden-Powell even characterized it as being totally unlike that of any other meteor he had examined.
So not a typical meteor.
Apparently not. Despite these unusual characteristics, there were attempts to explain its combustibility by suggesting it had somehow acquired charcoal from the ground after falling.
Picking up fuel after landing. The description of a falling stone that actively burned and exhibited a unique composition certainly challenges typical meteorite classifications. The attempt to attribute the presence of charcoal to post-fall contact with the ground seems like a way to reconcile the unusual observations with more conventional explanations, but it doesn't fully address the other unique properties like its heaviness and sulfur content.
We also revisit the topic of resinous and bituminous substances.
More oily, sticky stuff falling.
With multiple reports of falls in various locations across Europe and even as far as Hungary and Bohemia, some even described as burning upon falling or leaving behind a distinct bituminous residue.
Burning resin. Sounds messy.
One particularly notable fall occurred at the Cape of Good Hope in 1933, where a substantial quantity, about 5 cubic feet of this material fell.
5 cubic feet, that's a lot.
Described as closely resembling a piece of cannel coal.
Like coal falling from the sky.
Pretty much. Despite this significant event and the descriptions of carbonaceous material, our source notes that prominent meteoriticists like Dr. Farrington and Mr. Proctor offered only limited acknowledgement of the presence of such carbon-rich matter in meteorites.
Interesting. The sheer volume of the bituminous substance reported in the Cape of Good Hope fall makes it very difficult to dismiss as mere airborne pollution or organic debris. The direct comparison to cannel coal strongly suggests a significant carbonaceous composition. And the limited acceptance of such materials in meteorites by some experts highlights a potential bias or gap in our understanding of extraterrestrial materials.
Finally, in our mineral category, we encounter a rather radical and perhaps somewhat fringe argument presented in the Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society memoirs.
Okay, what's this?
The suggestion that certain roundish stones frequently found embedded within coal seams are actually fossil aerolites.
Fossil meteorites in coal.
Essentially, ancient stony meteorites that fell into primeval forests millions of years ago and were subsequently incorporated into the coal formation process.
Wow, that's a long game explanation.
Isn't it? This intriguing idea, however, seems to have been met with a resounding silence at the meetings of the British Association.
Not surprised. The concept of fossil aerolites offers a fascinating and very long-term perspective on the phenomenon of unusual falls, suggesting that such events may have been occurring throughout Earth's history and becoming preserved within geological strata.
Yeah.
But the lack of discussion at the British Association likely reflects the highly speculative and potentially controversial nature of such a claim, which would require significant geological and paleontological evidence to support.
Okay, now let's move into a truly eclectic and somewhat puzzling collection. Unusual objects and discoveries.
Weird objects falling or found. Let's go.
Reported as falling from the sky or found in very strange circumstances. We begin with a stone wedge that reportedly fell near Cashel, Tipperary in August 1865.
A stone wedge, like a tool.
Exactly. Interestingly, our source notes that while the object was described by some as axe-like or wedge-shaped, the more scientifically orthodox preference was to categorize it as simply pyramidal.
Avoiding the tool implication. The subtle difference in terminology here, wedge-shaped versus pyramidal, might reflect a subconscious or even conscious resistance to labeling an object falling from the sky as potentially artificial or tool-like.
Could be.
Pyramidal is a more neutral geometric description, while wedge immediately suggests a function.
A roundish iron object was discovered after a thunderstorm in Brixton in August 1887.
Iron object, meteorite.
Well, despite thorough analysis by a chemist, it could not be definitively identified as either meteoritic in origin or artificially manufactured.
Either. Huh.
It was simply described as an oblate spheroid, a slightly flattened sphere.
An unclassifiable iron spheroid. Interesting.
We also have a rather curious report of an iron cannonball being found in a manure heap in Sussex after a thunderstorm.
A cannonball.
Yeah.
In manure after a storm. How?
One wonders how that might have gotten there.
The inability to classify the Brixton iron object is intriguing, as it suggests a material or formation process that was unfamiliar to contemporary science. The cannonball in the manure heap is certainly a puzzle. Was it somehow unearthed by the storm, or did it indeed fall? Its association with a thunderstorm is the key detail here.
Then there's a rather dramatic report of a farmer witnessing the ground being plowed out by something luminous during a thunderstorm.
Luminous plowing.
Our source attributes this to a luminous dug bronze axe, quoting a W.B. Tripp, who was a fellow of the Meteorological Society.
A luminous bronze axe doing the plowing. This account is quite striking, suggesting a significant release of energy associated with the thunderstorm, manifesting in a luminous form capable of disturbing the ground.
Right.
The description as a luminous dug bronze axe is certainly evocative, though its literal interpretation remains open to question. It might be a descriptive term rather than a precise identification of the object itself.
We also have a quartz disc measuring about 6 by 5 centimeters and 5 millimeters thick, housed in the Leiden Museum of Antiquities.
Quartz disc.
This object is said to have fallen onto a plantation in the Dutch West Indies following a meteoric explosion.
Fell after a meteor explosion.
Okay. And then we have the rather down-to-earth phenomenon of falling bricks.
Bricks. Falling from the sky.
A yellow to gray object resembling a brick was reported to have fallen in Richland, South Carolina.
A single brick.
And even more surprisingly, pieces of what appeared to be furnace-made bricks fell during a hailstorm in Padua.
Pieces of brick in hail.
While the explanation of hailstones somehow knocking bricks off buildings was offered, some of the hailstones themselves were found to contain a light grayish powder.
Powder in the hailstones.
Yeah.
The presence of manufactured brick fragments falling from the sky is quite perplexing and doesn't easily align with natural atmospheric processes.
That seem to.
While the explanation of hailstones dislodging bricks might account for some instances, the discovery of grayish powder within the hailstones themselves suggests a more direct involvement of the atmosphere in the distribution of this material.
A stone said to have fallen in Supino, Italy in September 1875 was conveniently attributed to having been knocked off a roof.
Ah, the knocked off a roof explanation.
But then we have a far more intriguing report of a good-sized stone of form clearly artificial that reportedly fell in Naples in November 1885.
Clearly artificial. That phrasing is key. The description of the Naples stone as being clearly artificial strongly suggests that this was a manufactured object, not a naturally occurring stone that was observed falling from the sky.
Yeah.
This raises profound questions about its origin and how it came to be there.
And finally, in this eclectic mix, we have the fascinating case of a crystal lens found in the treasure house at Nineveh.
A lens.
In ancient Nineveh.
A major city of ancient Assyria. The renowned scientist David Brewster argued that this was indeed a true optical lens, not merely a decorative ornament.
Wow. Suggesting advanced optics way back then.
That was his argument.
Yeah.
Suggesting a far earlier understanding of optics than conventionally believed. However, another prominent figure, Carpenter, strongly disagreed with this assessment, and his drawings in his book The Microscope and Its Revelations presented a different interpretation.
So a scientific debate about an ancient artifact. Could this be evidence of a long-lost advanced civilization? The debate continues to this day.
The possibility of an optical lens existing in ancient Assyria, centuries before its supposed invention, is a truly significant claim that would rewrite our understanding of the history of science and technology.
Absolutely.
The disagreement between such prominent figures as Brewster and Carpenter highlights the challenges of interpreting archaeological finds and the potential for different expert opinions based on the available evidence.
Now, we move into a particularly controversial area. The claim of finding fossils within meteorites.
Fossils in space rocks. This sounds big.
Dr. Hahn famously asserted that he had discovered microscopic fossils, including what appeared to be corals, sponges, shells, and crinoids within meteorite samples.
Microscopic fossils, like tiny sea creatures.
Exactly. He even published photographs to support his claims in popular science. However, this assertion was met with considerable skepticism, most notably by Professor Lawrence Smith, who dismissed Dr. Hahn as half insane.
Ouch. Half insane is pretty harsh dismissal.
Very. Interestingly, a Dr. Wineland conducted his own examination and actually supported Dr. Hahn's findings, concluding that the structures were indeed fossils and not simply mineral crystals.
So someone backed them up, saying they were fossils?
Yes, and then rather abruptly, the discussion seems to have fallen silent.
Shocked. Dr. Hahn's claims, if they had been widely accepted and verified by the scientific community, would have had incredibly profound implications for our understanding of the origins of life,
Huge implications.
suggesting the possibility of extraterrestrial life and the transport of organic material through space. Professor Smith's vehement dismissal and the subsequent lack of sustained scientific engagement with Dr. Hahn's findings highlight the strong resistance to ideas that challenge prevailing scientific paradigms.
Seems that way.
Dr. Wineland's supporting analysis makes the subsequent silence all the more intriguing, suggesting perhaps a lack of resources, further skepticism, or other factors that prevented further investigation.
Prepare yourselves for a truly bizarre category: falls of living creatures.
Raining animals. Okay, here we go.
We begin with frogs and toads. In Birmingham, England, in June 1892, a shower of small frogs reportedly fell, an event attributed to a specific whirlwind.
Raining frogs in Birmingham. Classic weird weather story.
Interestingly, these frogs were described as being almost white.
Almost white frogs, that's unusual too.
Other instances of falling frogs and toads are mentioned in France and Tahiti, and even a report of a fish falling in Scotland, but our source suggests these might be more readily explained by migration or localized weather events.
Okay, so maybe some are less weird.
What's particularly notable about the Birmingham frog fall is the apparent segregation only frogs fell, with no accompanying debris or other materials mentioned.
Just frogs. No leaves, twigs, dirt. Falls of small animals, particularly when they involve a single species and occur over a limited area, are indeed difficult to explain solely through typical whirlwind activity, which would generally be expected to pick up and transport a mixture of lightweight debris.
Good point.
The unusual, almost white coloration of the Birmingham frogs also adds to the mystery, suggesting they might have originated from a location or environment that affected their pigmentation.
Then we have falls of actual fishes.
Okay, raining fish now.
At Fetipur, India, in May 1833, a rather grim scene. Numerous fish fell, all of them reportedly dead and dry upon impact.
Dead and dry, not freshly souped up then.
Doesn't sound like it. And in a more recent event at Hinderwell, near Sunderland, England, in August 1918, hundreds of small sand eels rained down over a small area.
Sand eels.
Hundreds.
During a period of heavy rain and thunder, though notably no visible lightning was observed, this downpour of fish reportedly lasted a full 10 minutes.
10 minutes of raining sand eels.
Suggesting a relatively stationary source, and the fish were described as being stiff and hard when they were picked up.
Stiff and hard. Frozen, maybe.
Yeah.
The 10-minute duration of the fish fall at Hinderwell is a crucial detail that strongly argues against a simple, quick transport by a whirlwind. A whirlwind would typically be a more transient event.
The description of the fish as being dead, stiff, and hard when collected suggests that they may have been frozen or subjected to very cold temperatures prior to falling, further complicating a straightforward explanation.
And now, snakes.
Oh, lovely. Raining snakes.
Well, not quite raining. In Memphis, Tennessee, in January 1877, following a violent storm, numerous snakes were found crawling on the ground in masses.
Just appeared in masses.
However, crucially, none were observed falling from the sky, nor were any found on roofs. Again, the lack of reports of other falling debris, if a whirlwind had been the cause, is a significant point to consider.
Yeah, if a whirlwind dumped snakes, wouldn't it dump other stuff too? The localized appearance of a large number of snakes on the ground after a storm, without any direct observation of them falling or any accompanying debris, certainly raises questions about their sudden presence. While the storm might have somehow disturbed them from a hidden location, the sheer number and the lack of falling reports make a simple whirlwind explanation less convincing.
Finally, in this category, we have falls of larvae.
Larvae, like grubs or caterpillars.
Yeah. An estimated 300,000 larvae were reported to have fallen on snow in Lithuania in 1883.
300,000.
And a similar event occurred in Switzerland in 1856. In these cases, the explanation offered often involves whirlwinds uprooting trees and carrying the larvae aloft.
The whirlwind tree theory again? Plausible, maybe?
But then we have a report of black larvae, described as caterpillars, but thought to be beetles, falling on snow after a snowstorm in Warsaw.
Black larvae on snow.
And in Sais, France, larvae fell during a snowstorm, said to be of a species commonly found in the south of France, with even developed insects being discovered alongside them.
Developed insects, too. And from the south of France. That's specific.
Lastly, in Switzerland in January 1890, an incalculable number of black and yellow larvae fell during a major storm, attracting a large number of birds to the unusual feast.
Incalculable numbers. The falls of larvae, especially in instances where the species are not native to the location or where developed insects are found alongside the larvae, present significant challenges to purely local whirlwind explanations.
Definitely seems harder to explain.
The sheer volume of larvae reported in some of these events, such as the hundreds of thousands in Lithuania and the incalculable numbers in Switzerland, also strains the credibility of simple, localized transport mechanisms.
Right?
The presence of developed insects alongside larvae suggests a more complex phenomenon than just the accidental uprooting of a local insect population.
We're nearing the end of our incredibly extensive deep dive into these bizarre book stories,
It's been quite a journey through the weird.
hasn't it? Let's briefly touch upon some reports of stationary objects behaving strangely and other unusual events that defy easy categorization.
Okay, final strange bits.
In Vicksburg and Bovina, Mississippi, in May 1894, a small piece of alabaster and a gopher turtle reportedly fell during a hailstorm.
Alabaster and a turtle
Uh-huh.
falling together.
Yeah. Remarkably, at locations 8 miles apart.
8 miles apart.
Despite being documented in several publications, there was surprisingly little in-depth discussion in the mainstream scientific literature. One editor suggested local whirls capable of carrying heavy objects as a possible explanation.
A local whirl covering 8 miles and dropping a turtle and alabaster separately. That seems unlikely.
A bit of a stretch, yeah.
The simultaneous fall of such disparate and relatively heavy objects at locations 8 miles apart during the same hailstorm makes a localized whirlwind explanation highly improbable. It suggests a much larger scale or more unusual atmospheric phenomenon at play. The lack of significant scientific investigation into such a peculiar event is also noteworthy.
And finally, in this category, we have a brief but baffling report. A tornado in Wisconsin in May 1878 is said to have carried away both a barn and a horse.
Okay, tornadoes do that.
And neither were ever seen again.
Never found
Yeah.
at all.
Wow.
Sometimes even seemingly mundane explanations like tornadoes can lead to truly baffling disappearances.
Right.
The complete and utter disappearance of a structure as large as a barn and a creature as substantial as a horse in a tornado, leaving no trace behind, is a stark reminder of the immense power of natural forces and the enduring mysteries they can sometimes create.
Our very last category delves into the intriguing and often debated realm of inscribed stones and artifacts.
Oh, mysterious artifacts. Always interesting.
Found in unusual or suggestive contexts. We have the Grave Creek stone from West Virginia, discovered within a mound in 1838, which featured alphabetic characters.
Letters on an ancient stone from a mound. Controversial, I bet.
Highly. Its authenticity was quickly questioned, with some experts like Colonel Whittlesey and an individual known only as A.B. suggesting it was a fraud due to the Hebrew characters bearing a closer resemblance to modern forms rather than ancient scripts.
The looks too modern argument, common with these finds.
Then we have the Davenport tablets from Iowa, unearthed from a mound by a Reverend Mr. Gass, which were inscribed with letters TFTWNS.
TFTWNS. Any idea what that means?
Not really clear. Some attempted to link them to a brass plate bearing similar characters found in Menin, Illinois.
The discovery of inscribed artifacts within ancient burial mounds invariably sparks intense debate regarding their authenticity and the possibility of pre-Columbian contact between different cultures.
Always.
The swift dismissal of the Grave Creek stone as a likely forgery underscores the importance of careful linguistic and archaeological analysis in determining the age and origin of such finds. The attempted link between the Davenport tablets and the Illinois brass plate suggests a desire to find connections, but the validity of such links often remains contested.
We also have the rather enigmatic case of a plain FEI inscription found without any other accompanying markings.
FEI.
Yeah.
This simple inscription is described in our source as one of the darkest problems of prehistoric times by the anthropologist Solus. a view apparently shared by other researchers like Mr. Kayak and Mr. Bull.
A darkest problem. That's dramatic phrasing for 3 letters. It is. Then there's the intriguing discovery in Bradley County, Tennessee by Mr. J.H. Hooper of a long wall bearing numerous alphabetic characters.
A whole wall of letters.
An astonishing 872 were examined hidden beneath a layer of cement. These characters were noted to have certain similarities to Oriental alphabets, further deepening the mystery.
Oriental alphabet similarities in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Under cement. That's
Yeah.
quite a find.
It sounds like it.
These enigmatic inscriptions, lacking clear contextual clues or obvious linguistic connections to known ancient languages of their respective regions, hint at the possibility of lost writing systems or perhaps even evidence of cultural interactions that are not currently accounted for in our historical understanding.
Mm-hmm.
The sheer number of characters on the Bradley County stone is particularly intriguing and warrants further investigation if the artifact still exists.
But perhaps the most perplexing story in this category involves the Chinese seals of Ireland.
Chinese seals
Oh.
in Ireland.
Yeah. A dozen identical cube-shaped seals, each featuring animal figures on top and bearing ancient Chinese inscriptions, have been found scattered across Ireland.
A dozen. Identical.
Yeah.
Ancient Chinese in Ireland.
Yes. Archaeologists are generally in agreement that there was no significant ancient contact between China and Ireland, and no other ancient Chinese artifacts have been discovered to support such a connection.
So just these seals. Nothing else.
Nothing else. Furthermore, these seals have been found widely distributed, seemingly at random locations across the Irish landscape. Our source even quotes one expert from the Royal Irish Academy saying they appear to have been sown broadcast over the county in some strange way.
Sown broadcast. Like
And
someone just scattered them.
that's the implication, with one even being recovered from a riverbed.
This is bizarre.
Yeah.
The presence of a dozen identical ancient Chinese artifacts, appearing in isolation and across a significant geographical area in Ireland, with no other corroborating evidence of ancient interaction between the two regions, presents a profound archaeological anomaly.
It really does.
The suggestion that they were sown broadcast implies a deliberate act, but the purpose and the agent remain entirely unknown. It challenges our understanding of historical trade routes and cultural exchange.
And throughout all these truly remarkable accounts, we've also caught fleeting glimpses of unusual atmospheric phenomena and what today we might loosely categorize as unidentified flying objects.
Ah, the UFO connection, subtly hinted at.
We've heard about a triangular cloud observed during a storm, mysterious aerial lights, a majestic comet-like apparition seen over Puerto Rico for 3 consecutive nights.
Comet-like for 3 nights.
A torpedo-shaped object witnessed in the skies above Sulphur Springs, Ohio, that reportedly dropped something before vanishing into the clouds, leaving behind a luminous trail.
Drop something, a torpedo shape.
Okay. And a terrific explosion heard in Burlington, Vermont, accompanied by a luminous object falling from the sky. These brief snippets suggest that the skies of the past may have held even more mysteries than we currently appreciate.
These brief mentions of unusual aerial phenomena, often occurring in conjunction with other strange events, add another layer of complexity to the overall picture.
Yeah, Faye.
They hint at the possibility that some of the unexplained falls and objects might be related to other, equally unexplained occurrences in the atmosphere, suggesting a broader pattern of unusual activity that deserves further consideration.
So there you have it. What we've explored today is just a fraction of the truly remarkable and often utterly unexplained stories our listener unearthed.
A fraction. We covered so much. Oh, wait, no, the prompt said we covered all the stories in the source.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the full collection from the listener's source.
Ah, right. Yes, we've actually gone through all the specific accounts provided in the source material. Recurring themes of bizarre falls, strange objects appearing in the most unexpected places, and events that seem to fly in the face of conventional scientific explanations of the time.
These collected accounts serve as a potent reminder of the limitations of our understanding, both in the past and perhaps even in the present. They challenge our assumptions about the natural world, the nature of reality itself, and the scope of phenomena that might be occurring around us, often unnoticed or dismissed.
Absolutely. These are the kinds of damned data, the pieces of information that don't quite fit into our neat and tidy scientific boxes and are therefore often overlooked, marginalized, or simply forgotten. We urge you, our listener, to really ponder these incredible stories. What could they possibly imply about the world we live in and the universe beyond?
Perhaps true understanding doesn't lie solely in having all the answers, but rather in maintaining an open and curious mind, willing to entertain the possibility of the extraordinary, even when faced with skepticism and the strong human tendency to seek simple, conventional explanations.
Exactly. Maybe the truly well-informed are those who dare to consider the improbable. Thanks for joining us on this epic deep dive.